Let's think about this clearly. Chaos doesn't just happen. It's not random and it's not accidental. It shows up where boundaries are weak or non-existent. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll notice that the areas in your life that feel most out of control, whether that's relationships, work, your emotional life, those are usually the very same places where your lines have become blurred or never existed in the first place. You don't get peace by hoping for it. You don't stumble into it one day just because you're tired of the noise. Peace is earned. It is, in fact, one of the most disciplined outcomes a person can produce, and it begins with the courage to define what is and what is not acceptable in your reality. Boundaries in the psychological sense are not walls, they are definitions. And definition is the precondition for order. If you cannot define where you end and someone else begins, then you will live in confusion. And confusion is the breeding ground for chaos. Now, some people hear that and they bristle. They think, well, that sounds selfish, but it's not. It's the opposite of selfish. Because if you don't know how to maintain your own space, your time, your values, your energy, then you will eventually become a burden to everyone around you. You'll either be resentful, anxious, perpetually exhausted, or emotionally reactive. And those symptoms are not signs of moral virtue. They are signs that your psychological system is under siege, that your peace has been traded either for approval or convenience or because no one ever taught you it was worth protecting. Think of the average person's day. They wake up immediately flooded with demands, texts, emails, to-dos. Their attention is hijacked before they've had a moment to locate themselves internally. Then they go out into the world, often stepping into environments where they're expected to be agreeable, accommodating, pleasant. Many of them, perhaps most, never learned how to say no without guilt or how to assert their needs without fear. And so they become a kind of emotional sponge, absorbing everyone else's priorities while slowly losing sight of their own. The psychological toll of living without boundaries is cumulative. It doesn't hit all at once. It's subtle. It shows up as chronic anxiety, as a constant undertone of frustration, as burnout that feels inexplicable, because technically nothing is wrong, but something is wrong. And that something is the absence of order at the level of identity. And this is the real tragedy, when people lose sight of their own sovereignty, when they forget that they have the right, and I would say the responsibility, to curate the influences in their life, to decide who they give access to, what they tolerate, what they prioritize. Because if you don't do that, if you don't take that authority seriously, someone else will happily step in and shape your existence according to their desires. And they won't do it maliciously, necessarily. Often they'll do it unknowingly, but the result is the same. You end up living someone else's life while yours sits idle in the background. The foundation of psychological strength is built through the act of conscious separation, not isolation, but distinction. It is knowing where you stand and being willing to defend that ground. And here's where it gets difficult. Enforcing boundaries isn't comfortable. It requires confrontation. It might disappoint people. It might make you look, at least temporarily, like the difficult one. But I would argue this: better to be momentarily misunderstood than chronically resentful. Better to face short-term discomfort than long-term self-abandoning. When you start protecting your peace, something strange happens. People who were benefiting from your lack of boundaries may begin to push back. They may accuse you of changing, of being selfish, of withdrawing, but what they're really saying is this: I was used to you being accessible at the cost of yourself. And now that you're not, I have to deal with the discomfort of not being prioritized by someone who used to be easily manipulated. And that's fine. That discomfort isn't your responsibility. Your responsibility is to steward your life wisely, to make sure you are not squandering your limited energy on people and environments that do not honor your effort or your presence. Because here's the truth: your peace is not free. It has a cost, and that cost is the willingness to say no, to walk away, to disappoint, to be misunderstood, in service of something greater, in service of a life that is coherent, intentional, and aligned. When you draw that line, when you say, this is where I stand, you become something formidable. not aggressive but immovable, not loud but unmistakably present. And in a world full of noise, that kind of quiet strength is magnetic. It draws respect. It commands attention without demanding it. And most importantly, it creates space for the real you to finally emerge. So if you want to own your life, start here. Define what you are no longer available for. Write it down. Speak it clearly. Enforce it consistently. That line, that single line, may be the beginning of your liberation. Because until you protect your peace, you don't own your life. And if you don't own your life, someone else does. Let's examine something fundamental. Your attention is the most valuable currency you have. Not your money, not your time, your attention. Because where your attention goes, your life goes. And if you're not deliberate about where you place it, someone else or something else will claim it for you. And once they do, they will slowly begin to define the shape of your emotional experience, your thoughts, your habits, and eventually your identity. That's not a theory, it's a pattern, a predictable psychological chain reaction. Now, we live in an era of constant stimulation. Our phones buzz, our inboxes overflow, social media algorithms are designed to hijack the reward systems of our brain. You are being pulled in 1,000 directions every day, and not gently. These are deliberate, psychologically sophisticated attempts to manipulate your nervous system, to bypass your conscious thought and appeal directly to your impulses. And unless you have cultivated a robust internal structure, a strong sense of who you are and what matters to you, you'll get swept away. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. The system is designed to overwhelm unprotected minds. Think about this. Have you ever caught yourself endlessly scrolling through content that doesn't feed you in any meaningful way, intellectually, emotionally, or spiritually? And yet, hours pass, and you've invested energy, focus, even parts of your identity into things that didn't deserve it? That's not an accident. That's a failure of psychological gatekeeping. And when that happens over and over again, what you end up with is a fragmented mind, a scattered life, an anxious baseline, because attention without intention is a recipe for inner chaos. So protecting your peace isn't just about saying no to toxic people or avoiding drama. That's part of it, but it's not the core. The deeper issue is about managing what you allow to enter your mental ecosystem. What are you allowing to shape your internal dialogue? Who are you listening to? What narratives are you internalizing about yourself, your worth, your potential, your limitations? You cannot outsource that responsibility. You cannot delegate the curation of your mind. You have to become the vigilant guard of your own consciousness. And this takes work, not once, but daily, because distraction is the default. Clarity is a practice. One of the most common mistakes people make is confusing being informed with being enlightened. They consume news 24/7. They're always up to date on the latest drama or scandal or trend, but their inner world is starving. It's being filled with noise, not wisdom. And the mind, like the body, adapts to what it's fed. If you feed it conflict, confusion, negativity, don't be surprised when your thoughts become restless and reactive. If you feed it discipline, beauty, depth, it will become a source of stability, not volatility. The other piece here is emotional regulation. If you are constantly reacting, if you're triggered by every comment, every tweet, every piece of bad news, then you're not thinking anymore, you're just reacting. You've become a puppet of the environment, not the architect of your mind. And that is not a position of strength. High achievers, those who accomplish something meaningful in the world, they all understand this. Their focus is sacred. Their peace is non-negotiable, and they protect it with intensity. Not because they're antisocial or aloof, but because they know what's at stake. They know that distraction is death, not literal perhaps, but the death of depth, the death of insight, the death of sustained effort toward a worthy goal. And without that kind of effort, you drift, you exist, but you don't live. There's a passage in the New Testament actually where Christ says, "Let your eye be single, and your whole body will be full of light." Now, whether you're religious or not isn't the point. The psychological truth here is profound. Let your eye be single. That means focus. That means discipline. That means filtering out the noise. That means not giving your attention to every passing thing just because it's available. The light, the order, the meaning, the power comes when the focus is clean, when the mind is undivided. And so you have to ask yourself, what are you allowing into your field of awareness every single day? What are you meditating on? Not in the formal sense, but in the repetitive, ruminative sense. Because whatever you return to mentally, you're meditating on. And what you meditate on, you magnify. It's not easy. It requires discomfort. You'll have to cut things out. Say no, close tabs, turn off notifications, walk away from conversations that drain you. But each of those micro decisions is a brick in the foundation of your peace. And once that foundation is in place, really in place, you begin to move through life differently. You're no longer blown around by every wind. You're not constantly pulled into petty dramas or pointless arguments. You become less reactive and more deliberate. You start creating instead of consuming. You start building instead of just surviving. That is the secret weapon of those who protect their peace. They reclaim their attention. And once they do, they reclaim their life. Because the quality of your life is determined by the quality of what you give your attention to. Guard it like everything depends on it, because it does. There's a strange cultural trend right now, one that treats emotional reactivity as a sign of authenticity. You hear things like, I'm just being real, or that's how I feel, so I said it, as if the rawness of an emotional response somehow validates it, justifies it, elevates it. But here's the problem with that. Feelings are real, yes, but they are not reality. They are signals, not laws. They are information, not instruction. And when you allow emotion to lead without discernment, what you end up with is chaos, internally and externally. That's why emotional regulation is not weakness. It's mastery. It's self-governance. It's the ability to respond rather than react, to choose intention over impulse. And that in every meaningful way is a form of power. Let's be clear, emotional regulation doesn't mean you suppress how you feel. It doesn't mean you fake calm while you're boiling inside. That's not regulation, that's avoidance. Real regulation is the process of acknowledging what you feel, investigating it, and then deciding what to do with it. Not based on what would feel good in the moment, but based on what aligns with your values and long-term direction. Think about how many lives are destroyed by impulsive emotional decisions. How many relationships collapse because someone couldn't pause for 10 seconds and breathe before speaking. How many professional opportunities are lost because someone acted out of ego, not principle. And then think about this. Every single one of those outcomes was avoidable, not with more intelligence, not with more education, but with more discipline, with the simple but difficult act of self-command. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think calmness is passive, that it's somehow submissive, that holding back a reaction makes you soft or fake. But if you look at the people who truly lead, not just in business or politics, but in life, what you'll see isn't emotional explosiveness. It's poise. It's stillness under pressure. It's the ability to stay grounded when everyone else is losing their footing. And that stillness isn't weakness. It's the sign that someone has built something inside of themselves that doesn't shake with the wind. Now, here's the psychological core of the issue. When you react emotionally to everything, you are giving your power away, moment by moment, to whoever or whatever pushes your buttons. You are essentially saying, you control my internal world. If you insult me, I rage. If you ignore me, I collapse. If you challenge me, I panic. That is not freedom. That is emotional slavery, and it's one of the fastest ways to lose your peace. Peace isn't found in having no problems. It's found in knowing that no matter what happens, you will not self-destruct in response. That you will hold the line mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that you are safe inside yourself. That kind of safety can't be given to you. It has to be built. And the blueprint is emotional regulation. From a neurological standpoint, when you're triggered, your limbic system takes over. The part of the brain designed for survival, not nuance. It doesn't care about truth or wisdom. It cares about dominance, escape, or defense. But the higher brain, the prefrontal cortex, is where logic, long-term thinking, and moral reasoning live. and you can't access that part of your brain while emotionally hijacked. So when you fail to regulate, you are literally disabling your best thinking in the moments you need it most. Now apply that to your relationships, your career, your sense of purpose. Can you afford to keep functioning from a place of reactivity? Or is there something higher, a version of you that doesn't get pulled into every argument, every insult, every perceived threat? You start to reclaim that higher self the moment you stop worshiping the immediacy of emotion. That's not repression, it's alignment, and it requires you to ask hard questions in real time. What am I actually feeling right now? Where is this coming from? What would a wise version of me do with this? These questions slow down the reactive loop. They create space, and in that space, you gain control. But control is just the beginning. With practice, emotional regulation turns into clarity. You begin to see patterns. You start noticing what triggers you and why. You stop over-explaining, over-apologizing, or overreacting. You learn to walk away when necessary. You speak when needed and say nothing when silence has more power. You stop trying to win arguments and instead focus on winning yourself back. And yes, this is difficult because we're living in a culture that rewards outrage, victimhood, and constant reaction. The loudest voices get the most clicks. The angriest posts go viral, but none of that leads to a meaningful life. It leads to burnout, broken relationships, and a constant state of emotional instability. That's not power. That's dependency on stimulation, on validation, on chaos. Real power is inner stillness. Real power is not needing to react to every provocation. Real power is being able to feel deeply and still choose wisely. And let me say this to anyone who thinks that kind of strength isn't visible or valuable. People feel it. When you walk into a room and you're calm, centered, and unmoved by drama, people may not know how to label it, but they know they can't shake you. They respect that even if they don't understand it, because calmness in the storm is rare and rarity commands attention. So if you want to protect your peace, start by mastering your reactions. Don't let every emotion dictate your next move. Observe it, learn from it, but lead it. Don't be led by it. Because when you master your emotions, you don't become less human, you become more powerful. And power, real power, begins on the inside. You know, one of the most understated yet dangerous forces working against inner peace, against personal sovereignty, is the compulsive need to explain yourself. It sounds innocent enough. Someone questions your choices, your boundaries, your identity, and there you are, scrambling to justify, to rationalize, to prove your legitimacy. But look deeper, and what you find is a psychological trap. It's a subtle form of self-abandonment. Because what you're doing in that moment is placing your inner truth, your integrity, up for negotiation. Now, it's important to understand where that impulse comes from, because we intuitively, evolutionarily, humans are social animals. Our brains are wired for connection, yes, but more specifically for acceptance. Exile from the group used to mean death. So the compulsion to explain ourselves, especially under pressure, can feel like a survival reflex. But we are no longer hunter-gatherers navigating tribal dynamics. We are, or at least we ought to be, autonomous agents. Conscious individuals striving toward a life of meaning, not mere approval. So here's the deeper issue. When someone pushes against your boundary and you respond with an explanation, you've already conceded that the other person is entitled to your reasoning. You've subtly acknowledged that their perception of your life holds equal or greater weight than your own. That's not humility, that's submission disguised as dialogue. But when you stand firm and simply say, "That doesn't work for me," or "I'm not available for that," without a paragraph of backstory, you do something radical. You declare that your peace, your psychological space, is not up for auction. You are not a defendant on trial. You are not begging the jury of public opinion for a favorable verdict. You're choosing to live from the inside out, not the outside in. And of course, people who are used to controlling others, manipulators, narcissists, even well-meaning boundary crossers, they hate that. They hate clarity without justification because it disarms them. They can't find a seam to wedge their argument into. They can't debate what you haven't offered up for debate. And that silence, that composure becomes your armor. That's why it's so powerful. Now, does that mean we never explain ourselves? No, not exactly. Transparency, when chosen freely, is a gesture of trust. But the key word here is chosen. Explanation is a gift, not a tax. And when it becomes a tax, an obligation, you've already stepped into psychological debt. That debt festers. It turns into resentment, self-doubt, and eventually burnout, because it's exhausting to live in a perpetual state of performance, constantly calibrating your decisions to avoid conflict, or worse, to win approval. So, what's the solution? It's internal clarity. You have to know deeply what you value. You have to develop a relationship with your own intuition, something deeper than logic, more ancient than language. When you know what aligns with your peace, you don't need a 10-month thesis to justify it. You feel it in your body. Your conscience aligns with your words. That's where composure is born, not from apathy, but from alignment. People often confuse calm with passivity, but calm isn't weakness, it's restraint. It's the discipline of refusing to be emotionally hijacked. And when you refuse to be hijacked, you become impossible to manipulate. That's threatening to those who rely on emotional turbulence to assert control. The narcissist doesn't fear your anger, they thrive on it. But your silence, your stillness, that terrifies them because it means they no longer have access to your nervous system. They can't pull the strings. And that is liberation. Here's the paradox. The less you feel the need to explain yourself, the more respect you actually command, because people sense when someone is grounded. When their words aren't rehearsed but rooted, it creates a kind of gravitational field. You stop chasing validation, and in doing so, you become the kind of person whose presence quietly demands it. But this doesn't come without discomfort. There will be pushback. There will be moments when your silence is misinterpreted as arrogance or your boundaries labeled as selfishness. Let them misinterpret. Let them project. You are not obligated to contort your truth to fit someone else's frame of reference. The cost of peace is often misunderstanding, and you must be willing to pay it. And this is where the real challenge lies. The courage to disappoint others in order to remain loyal to yourself. Because if you don't protect your peace, no one else will. People will take and take, not out of malice necessarily, but out of habit. You teach them how to treat you by what you tolerate. And when you break that pattern, when you stop over-explaining and start owning your no, you shift the entire relational dynamic. You stop being reactive and you start becoming sovereign. So here's what I'll leave you with. The next time someone pressures you to explain a boundary you know is valid, try this. Don't. Just don't. Hold the silence. Let the discomfort rise and pass, and notice what happens. Not just externally, but internally. You feel a strange kind of power, not the power to control others, but the power to finally stand fully inside yourself. And that, I promise you, is the beginning of everything. You've probably heard the phrase, pick your battles. But what does that really mean when life is pushing in from all directions? When someone's provoking you, undermining you, maybe even slandering you, and you know you could hit back. Maybe you even want to, but something inside you tells you not to. That is strength. Not the absence of the desire to fight, but the deliberate restraint of it. That's what choosing peace in the face of chaos actually looks like. You see, we've developed this culturally glamorized version of strength. Loud, aggressive, dominant. The person who claps back faster, argues louder, or controls the room is seen as the winner. But real strength is quieter than that. It's measured not in how effectively you impose your will on others, but in how skillfully you manage your own. And there's no battleground more demanding than your own mind when chaos comes knocking. There's a crucial distinction between reaction and response. Reaction is immediate, it's emotional, it's the amygdala firing off in defense. But response, that's processed. That's conscious. That's choosing stillness when everything in your body is screaming for retaliation. And here's the philosophical truth. When you react, you give away control. You become a puppet to circumstance. But when you respond with intention, you reclaim your agency. You tell the world, I will not be dictated to by chaos. I choose how I show up. This isn't about being passive. It's not about allowing yourself to be walked over. That's weakness masquerading as peace. No, this is about discernment, the ability to determine whether engaging will elevate or diminish you. That's where wisdom lives. Sometimes peace is walking away. Sometimes it's standing firm and saying nothing. Sometimes it's saying very little, but saying it once, with such clarity that it echoes longer than any argument could. People will test you. That's inevitable. They'll throw bait, passive aggression, lies, guilt trips, even public attacks, waiting for you to break character. Why? Because if they can drag you into the chaos, they don't have to confront their own. If they can get you to explode, they get to call you the unstable one. So when you refuse to bite, when you maintain your composure, you expose something deeper: their need for control, their fear of your silence, their dependence on dysfunction. It's a power reversal, but it's not flashy. It doesn't get the applause. It's not a mic drop moment. It's internal, but you'll feel it. And that inner solidity, that's what separates the reactive from the grounded. And let me tell you, it is incredibly difficult. Choosing peace when you've been wronged feels like betrayal to your ego. Your pride wants blood. It wants to win. But ask yourself, win what? A temporary argument? A shallow sense of superiority? A momentary vindication that leaves your soul feeling empty? Because that's what chaos offers you. Noise, drama, distraction. It demands your attention because it thrives off your energy. But peace? Peace is expensive. It costs you your need to be right. It costs you your addiction to outrage. It costs you your fantasy of control. And that's why most people don't choose it. Not because they can't, but because they haven't yet understood its value. Peace isn't absence of conflict, it's presence of clarity. It's knowing that no situation, no person, no insult can touch the core of who you are unless you open the door and invite them in. And yes, that kind of mental boundary might isolate you. It might confuse people who expect the old version of you to rise up and spar with them. But that's okay. Let them be confused. Let them underestimate the strength it takes to sit still, breathe deep, and say, no, this isn't worth my energy. And you don't have to say it out loud. In fact, sometimes the most powerful declaration is nonverbal. It's in the tone of your no. It's in your absence from a fight. It's in your refusal to defend yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. It's in letting the drama collapse under its own weight while you walk away lighter, clearer, untouchable. This is how high achievers navigate life, not through constant confrontation, but through calculated conservation of their emotional energy. They understand that attention is currency, and they refuse to fund chaos. That's what separates the truly powerful from the merely reactive. Not the ability to control others, but the ability to govern themselves. So if you find yourself in the eye of the storm, surrounded by critics, manipulators, provocateurs, take a breath, ask yourself, is this battle necessary, or is it a test of my discipline? Is my peace worth trading for this moment of ego satisfaction? And if the answer is no, then let it go. Stand tall, stay quiet, and move forward. Because real strength isn't about showing how hard you can hit. It's about showing how firmly you can stand without needing to swing. And that right there is the power move chaos can't handle. There's a critical misunderstanding when people talk about boundaries. They imagine them as walls, cold, unmoving, impenetrable. And maybe that's understandable, especially if you've spent your life being run over, dismissed, or emotionally invaded. The instinct to build a fortress is natural, but boundaries, real healthy ones, aren't meant to be fortresses. They're more like doors, not walls that shut people out, but doors that you control. You choose who gets in, how far they come, and under what terms. You decide. That's the essence of psychological sovereignty. If you don't define the rules of engagement in your life, someone else will. And not out of malice necessarily. People will always test your limits, not because they're evil, but because it's in our nature to expand into any space we're allowed. It's the same in relationships, in workplaces, in friendship. If you've ever found yourself saying, I don't know how this happened, after being taken advantage of or overwhelmed, it likely began with a door you left open too long or never learned how to close. You need to understand something vital here. Peace and boundaries are inseparable. You cannot protect your peace if your life is wide open to every demand, opinion, and expectation thrown at you. You will be stretched, drained, and reshaped by forces that do not have your best interests at heart. And over time, that erosion of self creates resentment, not because others are inherently toxic, but because you failed to define your space. You taught people how to treat you by what you tolerated. That's not an accusation, it's a wake-up call. The difficult truth is that most people aren't used to you having boundaries, especially if you've never had them before. The moment you start to say no, or not right now, or this is not acceptable, you will be met with resistance. Why? because the old version of you was convenient, compliant, predictable, and your growth interrupts their comfort. So they'll test you. They'll guilt you. They'll try to pull you back into the old dance. But if your peace matters more than their comfort, you'll hold the line. Now, holding a boundary doesn't mean being rude. It doesn't mean shutting everyone out or becoming emotionally numb. It means learning the language of clarity, saying what you mean, following through on what you say, not as a form of aggression, but as a form of self-respect. Think of it as clean power, not loud, not angry, but unmistakably firm. When you say that doesn't work for me, and say it with conviction, something powerful happens. People recalibrate, or they leave, and either outcome is information, and that's what boundaries really do. They reveal. They show you who's willing to engage with you in a healthy way and who was only there for access, for convenience, for control. When you start filtering your life through standards rather than desperation, you stop begging for love or chasing validation. You begin to attract people who respect your energy because they see how you protect it. You need to realize how rare that is. In a culture addicted to oversharing, overstimulation, and overexposure, someone who protects their peace, who controls access to their emotional world, is not only uncommon, they're powerful. Because they cannot be manipulated through guilt, fear, or approval seeking, their value isn't up for negotiation, their identity isn't outsourced to the moods and opinions of others. They're grounded. And grounding makes you immovable. Now, this isn't always glamorous. Sometimes setting a boundary looks like being misunderstood, like losing relationships you thought would last forever, like saying no to family or distancing from people who've known you your whole life but never really seen you. That hurts. There's grief in that, but it's a necessary grief, a price you pay to become whole. Because a life without boundaries isn't love. It's enmeshment, it's self-erasure, and no achievement, no relationship, no external validation is worth that cost. So how do you build boundaries without turning bitter? You anchor them in values, not reactions, not trauma, not revenge, but values. Ask yourself, what kind of life am I trying to build? What kind of relationships do I want to cultivate? What kind of energy do I want to sustain daily? Once you're clear on those answers, the boundaries become obvious. If something or someone undermines that vision, you have your answer. The door stays closed. You see, this whole process isn't about control, it's about choice. When you confuse the two, you either try to dominate everything or surrender to everything. But real freedom lies in knowing you don't have to let everyone in. You don't owe your energy to every knock at the door. You're allowed to pause, to evaluate, to say, I need time, or this doesn't align with who I am anymore. That's not arrogance. That's ownership. And ownership of self is the foundation of every meaningful transformation. So no, boundaries aren't about being hard. They're about being honest. They're not about rejection. They're about protection. And they're not walls. They're doors. Strong ones, with locks and hinges and thresholds that only you hold the key to. And if you hold that key with integrity, you'll find something unexpected, not just peace, but power. Real peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the ability to control what enters your world. And that right there is how you own your life.